Let me say thank you to all of you for being here, and I'm saying this on behalf of the University of South Florida, Sarasota-Manatee, and the Institute for Public Policy and Leadership that's led by Casey Welch. I also want to thank Sammy Arabogli, who is our timekeeper and one of our great student ambassadors. So we're cheer for Sammy. Okay, I like that. We always cheer for our students. That's a good thing. So we're delighted that we have an opportunity this afternoon to have heard from a number of the candidates for our very important positions in the Florida legislature. And we are on our final forum, not a debate, but a forum where we're speaking with our state Senate district, never mind. State Senate District 23, and we have with us Olivia Babis, Democrat candidate, and Joe Gruters, Republican candidate. So we're delighted that you are here, and we're delighted that our audience is here, either in the audience specifically or on TV. And with that, I also want to thank METV for being here and SNN for televising our forum, and for our two newspapers, the Bradenton Herald and the Sarasota Herald Tribune, for being here as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Emily Walsh, who is the moderator for our forum, and we look forward to hearing from both of our candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Holbrook. I'm Emily Walsh. I'm the publisher with the Observer Media Group, and we're happy to co-host this forum with USF Sarasota-Manatee and METV. Thank you to our candidates for being here with us to participate today. Here's the format we're going to use. We're going to open and close with a 2-minute opening and closing statement, and then you'll be asked a series of questions, and we'll have 2 minutes for your answers. We have a timer in front of you. When the yellow light comes on, that means you have 1 minute left, and the red light comes on, your time is up. If your opponent mentions your name or says my opponent, you will have a 30-second rebuttal time. Do you have any questions before we begin? We'll start with Ms. Babis. Can you please, in your opening statement, give us a little background and some qualifications and why you're running?
So my name is Olivia Babis. Thank you so much for everyone for attending today. Thank you so much to USF for hosting and the Observer for moderating. I am a third-generation Floridian. I grew up and spent most of my life in Florida. I attended George Washington University and finished my bachelor's at University of Memphis. So I had an internship on Capitol Hill. So I worked for a congressman there. And I was born with a physical disability. Florida ranks 46th in the country for accessibility, which you would think with a state with a population our age that we would be a little bit better, but unfortunately we're not. And I am sort of the living timeline of the disability rights movement. I was born around the time that disability rights really started kind of gaining ground. So I was one of the first waves of students that started public school that was really allowed into the public school system. So my family had a lot of battles with the public schools. I work at a Center for Independent Living here in Sarasota, so I work with other adults with disabilities. And I really decided to run because I've seen people within the disability community and our veterans and our seniors in this district still struggling with a lot of the issues that I've dealt with throughout my entire life. We have our students that are still struggling with a lot of the issues in the public school system. 40% of our district is housing insecure. 32% of our seniors are on food stamps. We have waiting lists for housing. We have waiting lists for our services, for home and community-based supports. And these issues aren't being addressed. This is kind of the forgotten community, but they make up 20% of our population. And our legislature really has forgotten that the goal of government is to protect its people, and it's really not doing that job. So I have the policy experience. I've worked in policy for a number of years now, and I want to really address these issues that aren't being addressed by our current representatives.
Thank you. Mr. Gruters.
Thank you, Emily, and I'd like to thank the Observer Group for sponsoring today's forum. I'd like to thank USF and Dr. Holbrook and the entire USF family for hosting this forum to give us the ability to take our message to the voters directly. I think it's needed. I'd like to thank my opponent for running and keeping the race clean, and just thank the community overall for allowing me to serve over the last couple of years as the representative for this area. I am a fourth-generation Sarasotan. My great-grandfather moved here in 1922 to become the chief tent maker of the Ringling Circus, and he ran the winter quarters when the circus was on the road, and my family's been here ever since. I grew up here. I actually graduated from high school at Cardinal Mooney. Back early on, I took a couple of undergraduate classes right here at USF Sarasota, back when it was combined with New College at the old campus, but I ended up taking most of my fifth year of accounting classes here on this campus, and I got my MBA from USF, and as a result of my fifth year of accounting at USF, I'm a practicing certified public accountant. I'm the managing partner of multiple offices in Sarasota and Venice, and it's my goal every day as the current representative is to do all I can to help our community be the best it possibly can be, and to make our area the best possible place to raise a family and be employed and be a good provider for your children. And I'm going to go up to bat to represent all people, and I look forward to the rest of the forum today. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with Mr. Gruters. If elected to the legislature, what are your top three priorities? And give us an example of a bill you might sponsor at the next session.
Well, and I could say that my priorities will probably be the same as they were in the House. And first and foremost, it's a commitment to my community. You know, the legislature does a lot of things, but one of the things we have the ability to do is go up and fight on behalf of our community to get a funding for a variety of different sources. I sponsored, probably over the course of 2 years, at least 6 bills for USF type sponsored bills as they were working in collaboration with Moat Marine, with the school system, with other areas. But it's like the circus. We have a lot of big projects coming up in Sarasota. Moat Marine's trying to build a new facility. We have the Selby Gardens is trying to revamp their campus. The Sarasota Bayfront, those are all going to require lots of state dollars, and I hope to be able to go up and fight on their behalf along with all the other community projects, specifically the arts, which needs to be fully funded because it's a cultural gem for us here in Sarasota. But also, for me, it's always been about jobs in the economy and keeping the overall business climate the best it possibly can be, because I think that at the end of the day, if parents can be better providers for their children, everybody wins. The community wins, the school system wins, and of course, I would end up on education and making sure we have the best possible place, because I believe that education is the great equalizer. And when we give the opportunity to children to better themselves, and again, it goes back, it has a tenfold benefit to the entire community and to everybody involved.
Thank you. Ms. Babis.
For me, environment and sustainable growth is a huge one. We've seen the results of what environmental regulation rollbacks have done to our water quality. We are suffering the effects of that with, rivers of green slime where the water is too toxic for people to touch. That has devastated the environment across the state over the past several months and affected our economy, affected public health. Healthcare is a huge one for me, and that is definitely something that I would want to address. Healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. We shouldn't have people dying of preventable diseases in the richest country in the world. Our healthcare policies are antiquated. They need to be addressed and they need to be reformed. They're not efficient, they're not effective. We have people on waiting lists that are decades long that are literally dying waiting for services in this state. So we don't just need Medicaid expansion, we really need to reform the programs that we have. And the last would really be affordable housing. As I mentioned earlier, we have 40% of this district that is housing insecure. I have people that I work with that have waited on housing wait lists that are 8 years long And that's just unacceptable, that the legislature has raided the Sandowski Affordable Trust Fund every year for about a decade now. When people need those funds to be able to purchase homes and to pay their rent and to maintain their homes. And so that definitely is an issue that needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you. So let's start on workforce, and we'll start with you, Ms. Babis. Unemployment is low, but wage growth is not keeping pace with inflation for most Florida workers. Are you in favor of raising Florida's minimum wage?
Absolutely. Giving tax cuts to corporations does not create jobs. What creates jobs is when people have money to spend, and people can't spend money when they don't have it. And the overall unemployment rate is low, but not in certain populations. We still have an unemployment rate of 60% among people with disabilities, and marginalized communities have a much higher unemployment rate than other communities, and that's an issue that we need to be addressing. And the jobs that we are creating are low skill, low wage jobs that have low job security. And we're seeing this with red tide. This is tourism jobs that, when the business is suffering, those jobs are cut. And people can't maintain their lifestyle. They can't pay rent. They can't pay their groceries because they don't have money to save. So we definitely need to be bringing higher wage, high security jobs, and we need to be training people for those jobs. But we actually have a lot of people that do have skills, but they just don't have the jobs in the area for that. And that's where we see people leaving the state and going other places for jobs and in other states and other areas of the state where they can find opportunities for the skills that they have.
Mr. Gruters?
Thank you. Certainly, I don't believe in raising the minimum wage as a form of a government solution. I think that continuing to try to create opportunities for people to grow. I'll tell you, I'm a small business owner as a CPA. I have 2 offices. I have 9 employees. I have an intern that started right from USF, and I started paying him $10 an hour a year ago. He's up to $15 an hour, and he's making $15 an hour because if I didn't pay him $15 an hour, he'd go across the street and probably make $17 an hour. So what happens is when we have a strong economy, when we have low unemployment, the key for us is to well, it's not the key for anybody, but what it is a great economy will raise rates, and the market will drive those forces, and everybody wins. Because the question is, if you start raising minimum wage to some arbitrary number, $15, $20, why not make it $50 an hour? $100 an hour. Everybody deserves to make a living wage. But what we have to do is create an environment where those jobs are available and ready, and hopefully by having the best education system we can give our students, they could be prepared to take the jobs that are available.
Thank you. Ms. Babis mentioned the Sadowski Housing Trust Fund money. Mr. Gruters, we'll start with you. What is your position on the legislature's use of that fund money for other purposes? Well,
certainly I think that when you have a trust fund, it should be used for the trust fund. We have a local group led by Scott Heller, and he's building some affordable housing for people that are in transitional type housing, some of the homeless. And it's really amazing what some of these people can do, and they are receiving some of those Sadowski trust funds. I think that if we were to spend all the dollars that were available to try to fix this issue, we can go a lot further. So I would say spend 100% of it on affordable housing. Let's make it so workers could live where they work, and do it in a way to where everybody could benefit. We should be able to find win-win scenarios for, obviously we have a density issue, right? Downtown we have a traffic issue, but we should be able to find creative ways to make it work to where we allow increased density with a trade-off for additional affordable housing designated units so that we can win as a community.
Thank you, Ms. Babis.
I think it's interesting that we have everybody saying that they don't want the trust fund rated, but we have even people that have been running or that have already been in office that have done nothing about this. So that's a really interesting perspective. But absolutely, we need to protect the funds in there and make sure that it's being used for the appropriate purposes. There is a project that's being built in Sarasota. I was at the meeting for that with the city commission, but there wasn't a whole lot of citizen engagement with this project. It's being plopped down in Sarasota like a McDonald's, that it worked in one area, so it should work in this area. And the neighborhood that it's being built next to is upset because they're worried about how it's going to impact them and traffic flow around their neighborhood. And the people that it's being built for weren't necessarily happy because they weren't consulted on the needs of the community. So there's a 80-unit apartment complex that has 17 parking spaces because people with disabilities don't drive, which I disagree with. I drove here myself. So the agencies that work with people with disabilities weren't consulted about the needs of that community, the needs of support staff that work with these people for parking needs for them. So the fact that the community isn't being consulted, that we're not having home rule a little bit with some of these projects is a little disconcerting as well. So we really need community engagement with these projects, and definitely need to make sure that the funds are used for what the funds were designed for.
Thank you. Let's move on to education, and we'll start with Ms. Babis. What is your position on school choice, charter schools, and voucher programs?
We've had this discussion on the for-profit charter schools versus the homegrown charter schools, the ones that are in Sarasota that have sprung up to fill a niche. That's fine. They're there to fill a need that's not being met. But the for-profit ones, those I absolutely do not support. There's absolutely no research that shows that the charter schools provide a better education than the public schools do. The voucher schools, I have been adamantly opposed to. This movement started up around the time that I was graduating from high school. And I found it disconcerting then. I still find it disconcerting now, because this is going against the things that I fought for when I was in public school. And it's really moving us backwards, particularly with the disability community that has fought so hard to be mainstreamed and fought for the services that are supposed to be provided in the school systems for students with disabilities. And it's really not being provided now. Students with disabilities or their parents are being coerced a lot of times onto the voucher programs. And these schools are not accountable to the state. Their teachers a lot of times don't have certifications. Their principals don't have degrees. They only have to meet building codes by the state, and a lot of times they're not inspected for that. So they're not qualified to be teaching kids, and the parents a lot of times aren't told that once they accept that scholarship, that they're basically signing away their child's right for free and appropriate public education. And a lot of times these schools are nothing more than babysitting services. So their students are not receiving education services that they should be receiving. And it really is a travesty, and it's taking $1 billion away from the Florida budget, and this is set to take 25% every year from the Florida budget, and I absolutely do not support them.
Mr. Gruters.
Thank you, Emily. Well, as a parent of a child in the public school system, he goes to Lakeview Elementary. It's a great school. It's a public school. I have 2 children on the way into the school system. My guess is they'll both end up at Lakeview. I was a supporter of the referendum, both in Manatee County and in Sarasota, to increase the tax base to allow the public schools more dollars. We have an amazing, really, it's a phenomenal education system here in Sarasota. And like I said, education is the great equalizer that we could provide for our children. And when it comes to charter schools or private schools that are receiving some of these tuition dollars, a lot of people don't know that every charter school in the state has to be not-for-profit. Now, it's some of the management companies that run it are for-profit, but some of and I don't want to get into the debate on every single person that provides a service, accounting firms, we're for-profit, we provide services to the schools. Lawyers, contractors, everybody makes a profit in this country. That's what makes the world go around. But at the end of the day, in terms of charter schools, the great thing about it is we have local control. Your school boards are in charge. They're the ones who approve them. And if you look at Sarasota County, just 2 in particular, I mean, we have the Sarasota Military Academy, which is phenomenal, does an amazing job. We have Suncoast. There's a lot of charter schools that do offer the niches that really provides parents a choice. And when it comes to some of these voucher programs and some of the scholarship programs, they are for the disabled. They're for the low income, for some of these kids who are in these failing school districts and schools year after year. To me as a parent, and for all parents out there, there's nobody that's going to fight harder or make the better decision for their own children than the parents themselves. And the more we can give these parents the opportunity to take control and to make the best decisions for them as a family and for their children, for their future success, to me, we've done an amazing job in Florida. I mean, a lot of people don't know that you could be in the public school system, you could live in Sarasota County, and I could send my kids to public schools in Manatee County. It's amazing what we've done in terms of the education system, and everybody that's been involved deserves a huge round of applause. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Mr. Gruters. Earlier this week, the Suncoast Campaign for Grade Level Reading held its annual community breakfast, where they highlighted the dire consequences for children who can't read on grade level by the end of third grade. Despite their efforts, the percentage of third graders reading on grade level dropped in the four-county region. In Sarasota County, it was 68%, and Manatee, it was 49%. What can or should the state do to help these sobering numbers?
Certainly, as we do these testings and we get the results back, any kids that are falling behind immediately need put in a program. My idea would be some type of summer remediation program so they can continue on, so they can get the skills they need. They said that if you can't get the basic skills by the time I think you're in third grade or fourth grade, then you're gonna have a much harder time later on in life. I personally stayed back in third grade. You know, it's not always easy to be held back. But at the end of the day, I made it up. I did college. I got a triple major in 3 years at Florida State, and I caught up. So it didn't hurt me long term. But you can't continue to advance these children unless they have the foundation to succeed. And as soon as we identify them, and a lot of people also don't know that I think over 50% of the kids in our elementary system are on free or reduced lunch. So that means a lot of these are from poor families. A lot of them are maybe it's ESOL, you know, English as a second language type student. And we have to do everything we can to identify the issues and then find the solution. And my best bet is to give them the specialized training they need. I will tell you that my son, who goes to the public school system, right away they identified him as having a speech impediment, and he had a issue with occupational. He was having a hard time just cutting, right? And so what's amazing, I couldn't even believe it, that now they had this process where they tested him, put him in a program, gave him special attention for his speech and for occupational therapy. And that's what I mean. Our school system has done an amazing job, and they really are just top notch. And the more access we can give to the students and make it available to all students, regardless if you go to Booker Elementary or the charter school or Sarasota, everybody needs to be treated equally, but give them the help that they need.
Thank you. Ms. Babis.
I mean, I think that speaks to the fact that Florida overall is not doing a great job in its school system, and that we do need to address these issues. And it does speak to some of our economic problems, because as he mentioned, you know, a lot of these are lower income households. They're on free and reduced lunch. Their parents are working 1-2 jobs each, and they don't have time to help their children with their homework. So a lot of these kids are trying to figure it out on their home, and they're on their own. You know, when I was a kid and I was growing up, I lived with my grandparents, and so my grandmother helped me, you know, with my homework at night. And a lot of these kids don't have that, or they are English as a second language. So a lot of times they're playing translator for their parents. So, you know, they're learning 2 languages at the same time, and that can cause delays as well. But, you know, the programs that he was talking about, I mean, those were the programs that I had growing up, was occupational therapy, where I was pulled out of the classroom, you know, to be taught how to do things by myself. And, you know, I was kind of a unique case that there weren't a whole lot of people like me, so most of the time I was teaching the occupational therapist more than the occupational therapist was teaching me. But these are the programs that are supposed to be available, and these are the programs that funding is be taking away from in the public school system to fund these voucher programs, and that's why I have a problem with those. But we do need the funding for programs to identify problems early on, so we're catching this early on. I think some of the high-stakes testing is contributing to this, where, kindergarten isn't kindergarten the way it was for me, where we all sat on a rug on the floor, and we had breaks, and we had recess, and, kids got to spend their energy and go run around on the playground. Now they're in desks, and they're looking at the front of the room, and studies have been done that show that kids, their eyes haven't developed enough where they can focus to look down on the paper and then look up at the front of the board and switch their focus back and forth like that. But that's what they're expected to do at really young ages now. So I think that really contributes to a lot of these problems as well, that we're expecting way too much at really young ages now, and we need to roll back some of that testing.
Okay. Ms. Babis, as we sit here on the campus of a state university that serves our community, what can the legislature do to ensure affordable access to quality higher education for local students?
We definitely need to keep tuition low to grant access to students. I know myself, coming out of college, I am going to be paying on student loans for the rest of my life. So I don't want to see other students in that situation, where we need to make sure that we have programs available for students to have access to education, to move forward, to acquire skills for higher paying jobs. And whether that be through grants or scholarships or volunteer programs where they can earn credits for classes and pay off some of these student debts. We had some of these programs for teachers and doctors and nurses that are willing to go into some communities that are underserved, where they can work for a couple of years and pay down their debts. So we need more programs like that that will offer people an opportunity to get rid of some of this debt, so they're not acquiring debts that they're going to be paying off for the rest of their life. And we need more technical degrees. Not everybody is going to go earn a 4-year degree. I work with the disability community. We have some really talented people, but not all of them are able to earn a bachelor's degree, and they need other options where they don't have to take English 101, English 102, literature classes, but where they have computer skills so they can go get some sort of certification and work with their talents and get higher wage jobs so they can afford housing, so they can move out and do the things that they want to do and use those skills and talents that they have. And unfortunately, they don't have the options for that, particularly for people that have developmental intellectual disabilities that really do have talents, they have abilities, but our education system just is not built for them. And for others that just may not have the ability to pursue a 4-year degree for whatever reason. So we really need to invest in some of those programs.
Mr. Gruters.
Thank you, Emily, and I'm all in for increased technical and vocational education, especially trying to give options at an early age to give everybody an opportunity to do the best for themselves. This is one area in terms of keeping tuition down where I really have probably the most knowledgeable in the entire legislature out of 160 members. I think I was the only member that's ever served on the board of trustees of a major university. For over 7 years, I served on the board of trustees at Florida State University, and I will tell you, when I was appointed by the governor the first time, I made a pledge to him that I would never raise tuition. And so what we have to do is we have to elect people in the mold of our great governor, Rick Scott. And it was amazing to me as because every time the administrators would come up and say, we need to raise tuition and this and that. And it was interesting. So at one time, this is a true story, the medical school, at Florida State, we're like 10,000 behind University of Florida, maybe 15,000, way behind USF and their medical school. And they were running a deficit every year. I said, well, we need to raise a little bit of money, so we're going to ask for $2,500 extra a year. And I said, okay, I'll leave that charge. I'll try to help. And I immediately get a call from the governor, Rick Scott, and he says, Joe, what are you doing raising tuition? I said, these doctors can afford it. These guys are making plenty of money. He said, no. I said, no tuition increases, no fee increases. And what he did was he literally stopped any type of tuition and fee increase in the entire state, at least for the last 5 years. Because if you were a board member and you continue to try to raise tuition or fees, you are gone. And so you have to have a commitment from the leadership of the schools. Now I think most schools have bought in. There's been no tuition fee increases. And on top of that, it's a commitment to well, if you look at the state colleges, what the governor did is he created these $10,000 degree programs where people should not be graduating with massive loans and debt. And like you, Faith, what happened is I graduated, when I graduated my MBA from USF, I think I had a $38,000 student loan debt. I'm so thankful that I had the access to get those loans, to be able to do everything that I did, and I paid it off over the course of the next 15 years, paying $300 a month. It took forever. It was a great investment in myself, but it's but the more what it does is when you do graduate with a huge, with the debt, it limits your options when you leave. So anything we could do to continue to decrease the cost of higher ed, I'll be for.
Okay, let's move on to healthcare, and we'll start with you, Mr. Gruters. In the past 10 years, Florida's Medicaid spending has increased 100%, from $15 billion to $30 billion. In that same period, if you combine the growth in population and inflation, that figure would be an increase of 29%. The growth in total state spending in that period has been 27%, from $70 billion to $89 billion. Medicaid spending is growing 3 times faster than population, inflation, and total state spending. What are your thoughts on how to address what is clearly an unsustainable trajectory? And in your answer, can you address if you favor expanding Medicaid, and how would you propose to pay for it?
No, I do not favor expansion of Medicaid, especially for working able-bodied people. What I am in favor of is the access to affordable, quality health care for as many people as we possibly can. And the question is, yeah, it's continuing to eat up almost all of our discretionary spending at the state. It will continue to increase it. Something has to change. I read an article in the Wall Street Journal recently by one of the Mercedes-Benz CEO, and he said, hopefully this happens sooner than later, but he was talking about technology, and he said over the next 10 years, he said what we really need is a complete transformation in the way we treat people and the way we treat healthcare. And he was talking about the Star Trek, the machine, and who knows how far off we are, but what we really need is we need to go to the very basic, and healthcare is such in a minute and a half, it's impossible to deal with all the issues because it's so complex. But my basic philosophy is everybody deserves affordable access to healthcare, and we have to do it in a way that will not bankrupt the state long term. And so I'll do everything I can to try to make those things happen in a reasonable manner.
Thank you. Ms. Babis.
So our Medicaid system was set up at a time when, people with disabilities and our seniors were pretty much institutionalized. And that is the system that we still have. And it's not efficient, it's not effective, it's not what people want. And it denies people choice. And we have people that are being warehoused in nursing homes that don't want to be there, and we're talking young adults with disabilities. When we think about, Stephen Hawking, he was the smartest man on the planet that functioned using one muscle in his cheek, that used his computer, and he went across and traveled internationally and wrote books and gave lectures, and that is because he had home and community-based services. We have one of the longest wait lists in the country for our home and community-based services program. We have 77,000 people on our wait list. One of the wait lists has 52,000 people on it, and the Department of Elder Affairs doesn't even know how to estimate how long that wait list is. We had 6,500 people die on these wait lists in 2016. But that is actually the most efficient, most effective use of Medicaid funds. People don't want to necessarily be in nursing homes, just we're not giving them a choice. And I work with people that are on these wait lists. We have a woman that we just lost a housing situation for that. We couldn't get support services for her, and we went all the way up to the head of Department of Elder Affairs to try and get funding for her. And she's 40 years old and doesn't want to live in the situation that she's in. It's not a great housing environment for her, but we have no other options. And these are the situations that we are leaving people stuck in. It's a violation of Olmstead, so the state is leaving itself vulnerable to an Olmstead challenge. And we really need to reform the Medicaid program. I do support expansion, but we need more than that. We need to just reform the entire system. I am a person with a disability, and because I work at all, I don't qualify for Medicaid. I actually buy a private policy through the ACA that does not meet my needs. I had to replace my wheelchair recently that I had to go through voc rehab to do. And we're talking about equipment that is as expensive as a car, minimal $8,000 that I don't have sitting around to pay for. So I have to go through other programs to meet my needs because private insurance doesn't consider durable medical equipment an essential health benefit. So I support a buy-in program to meet some of these needs, but mostly it's because we have not set up an efficient system.
Thank you. Last question before closing statements, and we'll start with you, Ms. Babis. Mote Marine, the Florida Wildlife Commission, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection recently announced more monitoring and research of red tide. What more can the state do to address the problem, if anything at all?
Right. So I agree with, what Tony Mowry and Ray Pilon were talking about earlier. This wasn't a problem that just fell out of the sky. This was decades in the making. Several administrations and state legislators have contributed to this problem. And there are a lot of factors that, excuse me, that have played into this. So, we can't play the blame game too much here. But we do know some of the things that do feed into this. We do know that Lake Okeechobee is a problem, that the nitrogen in the water that's coming down from the lakes and from the river, that this stuff feeds off this. That yes, it is a naturally occurring problem, but that we are feeding into it. And it's due to the fertilizers and septic tanks, and rolling back environmental regulations has contributed to that. So yes, we need to reinstate more strict water environmental regulations. We need to properly fund the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So we need to put those things back in place. We definitely need to research how this is affecting public health. This isn't just an economic problem, it's an environmental issue, it's a public health problem. People have been breathing this stuff. I have asthma, I know it's affected me. We've had a 20% increase in our area in emergency room visits and allergy visits, or allergist visits, pulmonologists, with people reporting respiratory issues, even people that never before experienced respiratory issues. So we know it's impacting public health. So we definitely need more research from a federal level, from the state level, and our county governments need to be participating in this as well. But we also need to reinstate home rule to allow local governments to kind of address how it's impacting their areas. We've had Sarasota and Venice try to step up and implement just fertilizer restrictions year-round, where there's some contention with the state saying, no, you can't do that because it's violation of state law. So we really need to put some of those policies back in force.
Thank you. Mr. Gruters.
Thank you, Emily. Red tide is naturally occurring. However, Mote has confirmed that there's a direct correlation between man-made pollution and the intensification of the blooms, which I agree with. We need further research dollars to study, A, how much that intensification occurs, and B, how we can mitigate it once it's here. There are lots of solutions right now, but we don't know the long-term damage that it could do with some of the treatments they may have available. And what's happened over the years is, as red tide has come out, research dollars has gone up, and then when red tide's away, the research dollars has disappeared. And so what Mote has asked for is a recurring, and I've already called for a bipartisan effort to reach out and try to go after, I think, $7 million over the next 5 years for dedicated funding for red tide research. He says, Dr. Crosby says, if we can get that funding and guarantee it, that he'll find the solutions that we need to take care of this problem. Certainly our waterways and beaches are the crown jewels of Florida. Our economy is directly tied to tourism, and we have to do everything we can to make sure we keep our area the best possible place to live and work. And when you look at the overall water quality of Sarasota Bay, Tampa Bay over the last 10, 20 years, it's actually, we've had a dramatic improvement. If you look at the seagrass growth that we've had here, if you look at the actual water visibility, marine life, it's been a significant improvement because of some of the work that we've done on the local level and state level to replace some of these negative impacts. I will tell you, since I'm running out of time, I'm one of the only 3 members of the entire legislature out of 160 members to co-sponsor the following bills. I co-sponsor the bill on fracking. I co-sponsor the resolution on the moratorium on Gulf oil drilling, and I was one of only 2 members to co-sponsor the bill that requires DEP to start removing some of these septic tanks near waterways with a dedicated funding source of $20 million from the Florida land fund, trust fund. And to me, it's all about doing what's right for our economy, because long-term, we all have to live here, and this is what makes our economy tick. So everything we could do to make sure that it's clean and pristine is what I'll try to do.
Thank you. And let's end with our closing statements, and we'll start with you, Mr. Gruters.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for sponsoring this. Thank you to USF for hosting this. Again, thank you to my opponent for being here and for running. It takes a lot to anybody to get into the public service and to try to run. It's we have 18 days to go. I'm ready for it to be over, and I tell people all the time, I think you're an extremely knowledgeable candidate, and you're well versed on the issues, and I think the district will be well served no matter who wins. But I hope the voters out there will listen to what I had to say today and decide to vote for me. I am a conservative at the end of the day. I'm going to do everything I can to make our area. This is my home. I've lived here my entire life, 41 years, and I think when you look at my overall voting record up in Tallahassee, you could see that I vote based on common sense and fairness, and it's not about always Republican versus Democrat or the conservative versus liberal. It's about common sense versus not common sense. It's about protecting the little guy from getting kicked in the shin by the big special interests, and I will continue to fight for everybody in my community here in Sarasota and Charlotte County when it comes to doing what's right and doing what's best for our community to make sure our area remains the best possible place to live and work.
Thank you, Ms. Babis.
Yes, thank you so much for hosting today. Thank you, Joe, for participating. 18 days, it has definitely been a long past several months. I'm very glad that we are reaching the end here too. But it's been great to meet the people throughout the district and interact and engage with them. And I've been to so many forums where I've met people. The disability community makes up 20% of the population. So 1 in 5 people, and somebody knows somebody that is affected by this. So I've had so many people come up to me after forums and say, I feel like you've just told my story. And I think diversity is important, and that's something that we have really lacked in the Florida legislature, and that having different perspectives is important. That there are a lot of issues that aren't being addressed and have really been neglected. And I work with those communities. I am part of that community. And I have been kicked in the shin repeatedly. A lot of people think, I make life look easy, but it has not been easy. And there are a lot of budget cuts that have personally affected me regarding transportation, regarding healthcare. I don't think most people would consider me lazy. And that is kind of the perspective and the reputation that people that use a lot of these programs get. But they're necessary. I'm in anything but anti-business. Technology and innovation has been the biggest boon for the disability community to allow us to be integrated into society. But we don't have access to a lot of the things that we need because of bad state policies. And I really want to bring a fresh perspective and different views and bring that voice to the Florida legislature that has really been ignored, and bring those perspectives and make sure that every community has a voice and that everyone is being heard, and make sure that these issues are being addressed that have really been ignored up to this point. So I hope that I can count on people's support and their vote on November 6th. So thank you.
I want to thank our candidates for participating today, and I wanted to thank again USF Sarasota-Manatee, Dr. Holbrook, Casey Walsh, and Charles Clapsaddle and his team over at METV. Again, I'm Emily Walsh, publisher with the Observer Media Group, and thank you all for attending and watching us on the internet. Thanks so much.